through the Bible and you hear these signs and you figure out what's going on, these are things that in the commentary that was attached to the reading, but also in mine, were meant to reveal God's nature and his concern for the people. But here we just have it's almost as if they've been thrown together. We have two feedings of multiple thousands. When one is the first is the 5,000, and then we have the 4,000. We have the walking on the water. We also have Jesus healing people, the sick in Gennesaret, which is the town in the northeast corner of the Sea of Galilee, in that region there. And again, having another battle with the Pharisees and the scribes, this time over the concept of tradition, or how we practice the law, would be another way of describing it. And then we have what's very interesting is the curing of the blind man, which apparently has to do, it is for some reason it doesn't take the first time. It has to happen again, curing of a deaf man. But there's a couple of interesting things. As I said, we have the walking on the water, but it seems almost as if it's just part of what's happening. And I don't know about you, but when I read this, it felt to me that Jesus was getting tired. And there was a bit of an edge. There seemed to be a bit of an edge to Jesus's response to not just the crowds, but to disciples. With the feeding of the 5,000, they come to him and say, Master, we've got all these people. It's getting late, and there's nothing here for people to eat. Give us some money so that we can buy something to give to them, so they can buy something to eat. And Jesus responds in Mark's rather terse language, "You give them something to eat." And it feels like he's kind of saying to them, why is it all on me? You do something. And I'm not saying that that's exactly what it is, but Mark's look. I started watching the PBS documentary on Hemingway. As an English major, I've read a lot of Hemingway's stuff, and he's known for his short sentences. Everything was very clipped and concise. And here we have Jesus saying, "You give them something to eat," and then are we to go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give it to them to eat? Is what they come back to him. And there's this little argument that's going on. And my feeling when I reread this was that there just seemed to be this weariness and this edge. And one of the things that I know Francis talks about is how Jesus sort of takes the time to go away and get some peace and quiet. And it's almost as if he truly needed that break. Because as soon as the 5,000 are fed, it says immediately he made his disciples get into the boat and go ahead of them. And afterwards, saying farewell to them, he went up to the mountain to pray. And so Jesus is seemingly desperate for some quiet, some space. And I'm not saying he took a time out, but he literally took some time away from the crowd and from the disciples. And that's when as he catches up to them, literally, by walking across the water, that's where this whole walking on water thing happens. And it was once again the reminder not to be afraid. And then we go into some healing in the Gennesaret region, and he gets back into the boat. And then we get to the elders and the tradition, the debate about tradition over what's clean and unclean. And and what is right according to God's law, what you can eat and can't eat. And what's really, really interesting about this is the whole notion of, as Jesus himself says, it's not what goes into the body that is unclean, it is what comes out. And which, interestingly, was something that didn't take with the disciples until Peter's vision of the picnic on the roof, where the blanket comes down with all the foods that they weren't supposed to eat. And that's where he has this idea that the Gentiles are also welcome to the table of God, which is an interesting metaphor, because all of these different foods, the things that were supposedly not kosher, not lawful, not clean, were God was saying you are to eat. He then takes that and metaphorically expands it to including Gentiles. It's a very interesting kind of, when you get that to the growth of the church. Jesus here is saying distinctly and clearly to these people, Peter included, it's not what goes in, it's what comes out. It's what comes from the heart. It's what comes from your mouth and your mind, your thoughts. And it is for me a very interesting distinction, and there's a conversation that goes on. But the story that really gets me, and I don't know about you, and maybe we could have a couple comments about this. I do ask a question around it, but the story that does get me is his exchange with the Syrophoenician woman, and we have him in the region of Tyre, and Tyre is up on the plateau and further sort of northeast, and it's away from the Galilee. And again, this is part of their walking tour. And he enters a house and did not want anyone else to know he was there, yet he could not escape notice. Excuse me, but a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit immediately heard about him, and she came and bowed down at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile of Syrophoenician origin, and she begged him to cast out the demon of her daughter. And he said to her, well, first off, how many times already have we heard in Mark? I think this is the third example of a parent advocating on behalf of their child. And also someone who may not have faith, but is desperate enough to have to go to Jesus and say, as the man said, which was the source of our Faith and Doubt series, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. Here we have this Syrophoenician woman who is a Gentile, not someone who would be Jewish, not someone who would be following who this Messiah would be. And she comes and she begs him to cast the demon out of her daughter. And just as Jesus seemingly snapped at his disciples saying, you get them something to eat, he turns to her and says, let the children be fed first, for it is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs. And I have to think, if this gospel was written for non-Jewish Roman Gentiles who had very little experience of who God is, the God of the Hebrews, and Jesus as this promised Messiah, as they're reading through this gospel and hearing these stories, they're probably already getting all worked up. He walks on water. He's done this. How did he feed all of these people? And so we're, there are things going on in their minds, and we get to this, and it comes across in our modern language as like he is literally taking her from being human, albeit one that he technically shouldn't be associating with, based on the tradition that he had this whole argument with the Pharisees about. She was a Gentile woman, and there's no mention of a husband, so maybe she's even a widow, which would just, again, keep her out of his social circle. And she comes to him while he's eating, and he uses the whole notion of the metaphor of eating and what's at the table. And he says, you know, it's not fair to take food from the children and throw it to the dogs. Now, the powerful aspect of this story is it says here, but she answered him, "Sir, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." Other translations talk about the scraps from the table. Images of, you know, Henry VIII and, you know, these royal kings just, you know, with this huge table with these emaciated dogs running around, literally picking up the scraps that were, you know, dropped from the excess of the king's lips. Here she is, literally, she's not questioning, she's not arguing, she's not saying, how dare you call me a dog? She literally just says, even dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs. And as we've heard in the other examples of a parent going for their child, he then says to her, "For saying that you may go, the demon has left your daughter." She went home, found the child lying in bed, and the demon gone. But again, and my sense of this, and again, in the quick reading, is there just seems to me to be an edge to Jesus. And I know from some of the commentary I've read that all of this, and certainly some of it is twisted in translation, given the argument of the tradition that comes with the Pharisees immediately before this, and the conversation that Jesus has with the disciples next, around as he goes into the demand for a sign and the yeast of the Pharisees and Herod. What we are caught up in with the story about this woman is something not about Jesus's treatment of the woman, but is an example of how expansive God's grace is and intends to be. It's not just being thrown around, it's being extended to those who have the faith despite everything, despite not being Jewish, despite not being, you know, devout, not being someone who was following the law. She came out of fear, doubt, hope, faith, to say to Jesus, "I believe, help my unbelief, save my daughter." Not for me, but for her. And what we hear here is how God's grace is not for those who think they're right, or think they're perfect, or think they're better than everyone else. Those who've set up laws to exclude people as opposed to include people. We have here an example of Jesus, even with the language that's happening here, telling those who come afterwards, especially the Romans, because they would have understood the whole hierarchy of society. If they hear this, they're thinking, okay, he's telling it like it is in our world. I, as the Messiah, I, as the king, I, as the rabbi, the teacher, I, as the one who is kosher, I, as the one who is here to uphold the law, shouldn't even be talking to you, shouldn't even be sharing with you the scraps from my table. Yet he says to her, because of what you have said, hang on a second, because of what you have said, go, your daughter has, the demon has left your daughter and she's been saved. And it's, for me, the challenge we have with the text is we have to try and come to this for the first time. And it's hard because we talked about this last time. You know, all of us grew up in a Christian culture, grew up in a Christian family, or at least have been Christian and reading the Bible for many years. But we now have this challenge of how are we to see and hear Jesus and his message for the first time. And we are in this little story, which I know has turned people off, especially in our culture today. How could he say this? And what I have come to see is embedded in this debate about law and tradition and who's right and who's wrong and who's in and who's out. This story tells us that God came not for those who are powerful or rich or right, but for those who are lost, those who are the least, those who are in need, those who are the widows, the orphans, the aliens. This is Jesus showing the rules of the kingdom as opposed to the traditions and the rules of humankind, which is exactly what he says to the Pharisees. Any thoughts on the story of the Phoenician woman? How did some of you react to that story? Yes.
Well, I really didn't understand that. I didn't think at all that he was referring to the children as God's people and the Jewish people, and the woman as a dog because she was out of that group. That never entered my mind. I just thought this was really confusing and I didn't understand it. And
it is confusing.
And I find it strange that Jesus, who included everybody, would refer to her as a dog.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's one of these things where, and I don't have the commentary that one of the ones that I was reading, I don't have it up at the present moment, but it is, it's such a strong phrase that it's hard to dismiss it as mere metaphor. Although it seems to be a metaphor, the metaphor of, the food at the table and sharing what is the feast for those who are not deserving of the feast. But the word that I'll have to look it up. I'll look it up during the video or during the private time, like the group time, and come back to you with that. But the phrase about the dogs is not specifically dog, but it is part of it is translation. It comes off much harsher than it is, but it's close. But the point being is what we have here is I have to be honest. Growing up, we always used to joke about my the upper management, my parents' generation. They would always, at the cottage, we'd have these huge meals, and my uncle was the most parsimonious carver ever, and so he would shave off the chicken, give it to the kids, and then there would be all this stuff left over, and so my father and him and my aunt would basically sit at the end of the table, and they'd pick off extra when they were finished their pieces, and I remember distinctly at one point, probably me, but one of us said, even dogs can eat from the scraps from the king's table, and silence. But there's this sense that there's the in group and there's those who are on the outs. And I know it's confusing, but I appreciate your honesty on that, Eunice. it is more palatable if you take it as a metaphor, but I'll find that document. Any other thoughts?
Well, I think she was desperate, and she probably thought she could as well try asking him.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes people who never say a prayer, but if something goes wrong in their life,
right,
would you pray for me or pray for my child or whatever? You know, sometimes when you're right at the end of your tether, you would want to try something different, and maybe that was her trying something different.
Well, when you think about the fact that she probably never in her wildest dreams thought that this person, this Jesus, this presumed Messiah, would show up in her town, right? She wasn't going to him. He kind of showed up. And so she is taking it. She is literally saying, I have nothing. You're right. I have nothing to lose. I'm going to go and see him and ask or beg, as it says, begging. She begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter. And so yeah, there's a definite sense of desperation. And it also goes back to some of the things that I've said, and some of you who've traveled with me have heard me say it. Don't say no for people. Like, you'll never know what grace you might receive if you just ask. All they can say is no. And in this case, what did she have to lose? Jesus could have said no. And in fact, he does. But what she does is she responds. And she responds in a way that shows humility and as well as a degree of respect and her desperate hope. I think you had it right there, listening. Anyone else? That was the story that's jumped out at me. Was there any story in particular of the, because this was a long reading, was there any story that jumped out to any of you? Who here remembers the reading? We all did it about a week and a half ago. Well, sorry.
How many times did he feed the multitudes? It seems like a number of times.
He fed people?
Two. It feels like a multitude of times because we've got the four gospels, and some gospels have two, some gospels have one. They are in essence recording or reporting the same events, but because you have the four different semi takes on them, there's a little bit, it's like looking at it from four different cameras, getting a different perspective on what's happening. But it happens twice. There are other times where he is feeding people, but it is not, it's not to this size. But each time there is an element of these being, examples of a communion, taking the bread and blessing it and breaking it and distributing it. What's interesting is in the Reformation, these two stories that became the basis of when communion is had, when we have communion. In the Episcopal system with the Catholic Church and the Anglican Church, you go to the priest. The priest is standing up front, and you receive communion, and it's kind of administered. It's handed out to you by the priest. In these stories, that's not what's happening. And in the Reformation saw this as not so much a democratization of God's grace, but the fact that God's grace emanates out and is there then received by everybody on a level playing field. It's not high priest here. And so what's really, really interesting is the churches, in particular the Reformed churches, and in particular Presbyterian churches, you have this idea of, and those of you who have been elders know the elaborate traditions and rituals we have around serving communion, and every house serves, every church serves it their own way because every house has its own traditions. Joanne, I muted you, so just to let you know, because of the background noise. So if you want to unmute yourself, you can, okay? But we, you know, the elders, in theory, the minister says the prayer, the words of institution and the communion prayer, the bread is broken, the minister hands it to the elders then take it and hands it to the people then take their bread. That's what's happening here. And that's where all of that came from. Because for the Reformation, it was about getting rid of the tradition of the high priest being a barrier to the table for people to receive grace. That takes us back to the story of the woman who says, even dogs can eat the scraps from the table. There's a lot of history in the Reformation around the dynamic that's happening here around who can receive grace. And I'm going down a rabbit hole here, so I'm going to stop. But there's to answer your question, there's two.
Okay.
Forgot the question, did you? Yes.
Jeff, thank you for muting me. I'm sorry, I've got someone coming to do an estimate on a roof replacement. So that's what's happening.
No worries. I just...
I appreciate that.
No problem. No problem. All right. I'm going to get the video started. And what I just wanted to say is talking about the feeding of the 5,000. The video is going to start in the one of my favorite places in Israel, the Church of the Multiplication in Tagba, and a very rare aerial shot of it, but it is for me a very, very special place, and it goes beyond that as the story goes beyond it. But I hope you enjoy the video, and I'm going to set this up. And I need to make sure I get everything set up right first.
The video was wonderful because I've watched it already, and it was like going home. We've been to some of those places. The four of us who are on this call have been there. Been there, done that. Oh, it was wonderful.
Goosebump moments? Goosebump moments?
Yeah, oh gosh. Kim, well, wait until you see it.
Yes, and for those who have not been there, please know there's no attempt to exclude you, but just to, just to let you know that there is...
It's powerful.
Yes. All right, so we're going to start. And we hope it does do it. Come on. You see, we talked it up and now it's not working. Sorry, I'm gonna have to reboot it. Shouldn't take long. But what's interesting also is, as Francis is going to talk about, is the whole idea of making, here we go. What did I do?
When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things. And when it grew late, his disciples came to him and said, "This is a desolate place, and the hour is now late. Send them away to go into the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat." But he answered them, "You give them something to eat." And they said to him, "Shall we go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give it to them to eat?" And he said to them, "How many loaves do you have? Go and see." And when they had found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. Then he commanded them all to sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups by hundreds and by 50s. And taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and said a blessing, and broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples to set before the people. And he divided the 2 fish among them all. And they all ate and were satisfied. And they took up 12 baskets full of broken pieces and of the fish. And those who ate the loaves were 5,000 men. This is the story of Jesus multiplying the bread. And it's huge. And first understand the backdrop that John the Baptist was just beheaded, and the disciples came and they had just buried his beheaded body. They hadn't eaten, they were out doing ministry, and Jesus says, "Let's get in a boat, let's go to the most remote place we can find." They come to the shore. And can you imagine just trying to picture 5,000 people sitting on this shore waiting for them? But rather than going away, the Bible says that Jesus has compassion on them. And he says they look like a bunch of sheep without a shepherd. So he comes on shore and he looks at these 5,000 people and he starts to teach them. And he goes and he's teaching them, and the disciples are saying, "It's getting late. We are so out in the middle of nowhere. They need to leave now so they can get some food somewhere." And Jesus says, "Feed them." And all they have are these 5 pieces of bread and 2 fish. And what Jesus does is he blesses this food, and somehow the bread and the fish multiplied to where 5,000 men, and some say there may have been women and children there in addition to that, they all eat, and then they pick up 12 basketfuls of bread. See, up until this point, Jesus has done some amazing things. Obviously, he's healing, he's casting out demons, but what's special about this miracle is he creates something out of nothing. He has bread just appear. This is so like the Old Testament when they were in the desert and the manna just appears. Here Jesus is creating. I understand, what would it feel like to be with a person who can make something out of nothing? And so he does that miracle. They get back in the boat. They start heading out, and that's when Jesus walks on water. And then they get to the other side, and there's another crowd, and it says that everyone starts flocking to him, and they just are begging him to touch his robe. And it says that everyone who touched his robe was healed. Okay, so this is all going on. The word about Jesus is out there, and now you see in chapter 7, the Pharisees come to him, and they say, "We have a question. How come your disciples don't wash their hands before they eat?" Okay, do you understand what's going on here? Jesus just made bread and fish appear from nowhere. He just walked on water. Crowds are coming, and everyone who touches even just his robe gets healed. And the Pharisees go, "Well, we have one question. How come your disciples don't wash their hands before they eat?" And Jesus just gets on them and he says, "Look, you guys are," first of all, he explains, this is one of your traditions. This wasn't in the law that you had to wash before eating. You see, the Pharisees felt like, well, if there's dirt in your hands, then it's going to enter into your body, and that's going to defile you. And what Jesus explains to them, he says, look, you don't get dirt on your hands. That never passes through your heart. It goes to your stomach and get expelled. He goes, that's not what dirties your heart. And he explains that what defiles a man is what's actually inside of the heart. He says, from within, out of the heart of man come evil thoughts, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, coveting, wickedness, deceit, sensuality, envy, slander, pride, foolishness. All these evil things come from within, and they defile a person. This is a very important statement, especially to our generation, where everyone is blaming something external for their sin issues. Well, it's because this happened to me. And I'm not trying to belittle the things that may have happened to us, but what Jesus explains is that there's something inherently inside of you, inside of your heart. It's your thoughts, the immorality, the greed, the coveting, all of these things come from inside, and that's what makes us dirty. And that's what he came to do, was not to change our external behavior. He says, I'm actually going to change you from the inside out. I can change your heart. That's the whole story. That's the whole point of what Jesus was doing. He was going to change us. He was going to change our standing before God. He was going to change the very inside of who we are. He later explains the Holy Spirit who changes us from within to where our desires even change. And it's no longer selfishness. And having worked in churches for years, I've seen so many people try to just curb behavior and get enough accountability around them so that they stop just doing certain things, and they never get to the heart. And Jesus came to change man's heart. And the question is has that happened to you? Gosh, it broke my heart when I would see so many people who would attend services week after week, and they would do so much to try to do the right thing. But at the end of the day, they never really knew Jesus. Inside of them had never been changed. The Holy Spirit never really entered into them. And we can blame all day all these reasons why we're still in our sin. But I want you to look inside and go, could it be that my heart was never changed? Because that's what really defiles us. And Jesus went on with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi. And on the way, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And they told him, "John the Baptist, and others say Elijah, and others one of the prophets." And he asked them, "But who do you say that I am?" Peter answered him, "You are the Christ." And he strictly charged them to tell no one about him. So I'm standing here in Caesarea Philippi, and this is where Jesus asked the disciples, who are people, what are they saying about me? Remember all the things that have been happening to this point. Remember that even after Jesus walked on water, okay, earlier in chapter 6, they're terrified, but it says that they still don't get it. They go, okay, this is not a human being. This is not just a normal person, but we still don't understand who he is. But it's here, and it's interesting that it's here in Caesarea Philippi, because this was like the most pagan place you could find. I mean, there's prostitution going on here. There's all sorts of crazy pagan worship going on. There's sacrifices. Even that, to my right over there was this place that they would call the gates of hell. Okay, it's just, that's where they would sacrifice, and they would look for the water to see whether it was coming out red or this or that. And it's in the midst of all of that as the disciples are walking through. And mind you, mostly he's been with the Jews to this point, and now he's getting to the Gentiles, and it's here that Peter makes this profession. And I know we're in the book of Mark, but I gotta read the account from Matthew, because in Matthew 16, when he's asked there, it says, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" They said, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, others Jeremiah, one of the prophets." He said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter replied, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered him, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it." Okay. Remember, the book of Mark is really about Peter. It's Peter telling the story and Mark recording this. And so Peter here is explaining, "Guys, this is when I got it. This is the moment I got it. I saw him walk on water. I saw him heal. I saw him, turn 2 fish and 5 pieces of bread. I saw him feed like thousands of people with this. Gosh, I saw him raise paralytics, heal the blind. I saw how he out-taught all the Pharisees. But there was something as we were walking through Caesarea Philippi when he asked me, "Who do you say that I am?" that I just knew it. And I get to see Jesus there as Matthew describes it, going, "This is what I came down on the earth to do, is to explain who I am." And when he says it's upon this confession, it's upon you, Peter, that I'm going to build this church. And the gates of hell aren't going to stand it. My church is going to be built now. See, the church was built around this confession that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. He says nothing is going to stop. This was the very beginning of it. This is Peter explained to Mark. This is the moment when I got it. When heaven, Jesus says, look, heaven just revealed that to you. And it's the same thing is true for today. It's because it's something that's origin is God, that we don't have to think, okay, I've got to battle the enemy, I've got to win this, I've got to keep the church alive. No, this is something that even Peter himself, it needed to be revealed to him from heaven. See, God is the instigator of all of this. And isn't that the gospel anyways? I mean, all along this path was God reaching down to man, God becoming man and proclaiming who he was to us. And obviously, it gets even better once we get to the cross. It's all about God pursuing us. So even at that moment when he confesses, the moment you confess, it's not something Peter figured out, just like it's not something you're going to figure out. It's something God has to reveal to you. And that's why in Matthew it explains, Jesus explains, look, the gates of hell won't stand against this. And you and I, 2,000 years later, are proof of that.
Wow. For me, the goosebump moments are the aerial views of these places. Interestingly, archaeologists have discovered a 3rd century Christian church right next to the cave there, which was believed to be the backdrop to the Temple of Pan, which was, in essence, this cave, which was deemed to be the portal or the gates to hell, was where sacrifices were thrown, and it was and Caesarea Philippi, and that area was essentially the West Edmonton Mall of religions. There were temples everywhere for different gods doing all these other things. And the disciples and Jesus trek all the way up there And in front of this humongous edifice of this temple, that's where Jesus says to the disciples, who do people say that I am? And it's interesting that Francis goes from the Mark version, which is really short, to the Matthew, which expands it more. And again, to highlight Peter as he talks about. And so we have but the idea that even when these rocks will fall, nothing will stop the kingdom of heaven. And then he says to Peter, on you, as rock, Petra, I will build the church. And you've got this humongous rock wall right there. Anyway, I did find the thing, as the video was happening, and really the gist of the story is that regarding going back to the woman and is the idea that it goes back to the whole notion of faith, not so much desperate faith, but faith and hope, and the idea that she was able to appeal to God, not because she was deserving, but because she knew she didn't deserve it. And I know when I, in the silent prayer of confession, when I approach God in that moment, it is often me saying, for the grace that for me has been undeserved, I give you thanks. And I think it's that key that people have see this, because the general interpretation is that, yes, the people that he was with were ancient enemies of Orthodox Jews, the kingdom of Israel, and he was really an enemy territory, and they were considered less than, they weren't even life, they were less than, and in many ways they would have been, in quotations, dogs to them, and so it is it's hard for us to hear in our language today. I'm not surprised Francis didn't go into it, but I think we have there's a lot there worthy of a Bible study all on its own. So we need to get moving. I'm going to set up the breakout rooms. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Ooh, 10. So we're going to go to 2 rooms. And I'm just going to, right. This is so, all right. I'm just going to go, here we go. And Elizabeth has dropped out, so we now have 5, 9, I mean. All right, so all right, so that's group 1, and group 2, you guys get to fight over who is going to be the speaker. All right, looking at the time, I'll give you about 16, 17 minutes just to get you through. And I apologize in advance. I'm a little rusty on my questions, so you can pick and choose, but good luck. Here we go. We'll see you shortly. So you should all be seeing your invitation.